Congress's Nyuntam Aay Yojana scheme promising cash transfers of at least 60,000 to 70,000 for women ahead of 2024 elections echoes similarities with the PM-KISAN scheme launched by incumbent government in 2018. In this Explained, we explore why politicians resort to such welfare schemes and whether direct benefit transfers are counterproductive to poverty alleviation.
According to a report in the Indian Express, the Indian National Congress, which is the principal opposition party in India, is planning to dust off its 2019 manifesto promise, which was to give NYAY, which is an acronym for Nyuntam Aay Yojana, which is a minimum income scheme. Under NYAY in 2019 election, Congress was promising to give something around 72,000 rupees to the 20% poorest families in India. That would mean around 5 crore families in India and would typically cover 25 crore people. Of course, Congress did not win that election and that idea never came to pass. But according to latest reports, Congress is planning to reboot that same scheme. And there is a chance that BJP may respond to something like that, because in 2018, just before NYAY was sort of promised, BJP itself, Prime Minister Modi had started something called PM-KISAN, which was about giving 6,000 rupees to all farmers. And this was considered to be the largest direct cash transfer for farmers anywhere in the world. Now, a lot of people believe that this is a bad idea, both for Congress and for BJP, to be giving direct cash to people. A lot of people also look at this as some kind of a universal basic income kind of a transfer. And in this video, we'll try to understand how to make sense of these promises and these policies. So the first thing to understand is that this is not universal basic income. Giving a certain section of population certain amount of money because they're poor is not the idea that universal basic income is. Under UBI, typically everybody in the economy gets a certain basic income, and it goes hand in hand with the government taking away all subsidies. So there would be no subsidies for food, fertilizer, any kind of subsidies that you can imagine. And the government basically says, okay, we believe that X amount is the minimum that you must get to live your life. And we'll give it to everybody, from the richest man to the poorest man to person who's working, not working, regardless. And the idea is that if you are doing better, then you will just simply get taxed away. So that's the idea behind a universal basic income. This is either NYAY or the PM-KISAN or whatever in the election run-up to the 2024 election we may see. None of these are typically universal basic income ideas because they don't apply to the whole population. The other thing is that universal basic income, as I mentioned, also takes away all subsidies. These are not going with that. Your many existing subsidies will continue. This is just an add-on. We are unlikely to see a scenario where everybody gets a universal basic income, because typically even the richest countries have found it to be too costly an idea to implement. Even Switzerland, it tried to debate this issue. They tried to make some calculations and they rejected it. And Switzerland is much richer than India in terms of per capita incomes. They were around $75,000, $80,000. We are at around $2,200, $400. So there's really no comparison. And even in Switzerland, they discarded the idea because they found it to be too costly. Now, the other thing that a lot of people ask about a policy like NYAY or PM-KISAN is that this typically violates the traditional wisdom of helping people, whether it is one man helping another or the government helping its poor people. the idea typically has been, or traditionally has been, that, don't give a man a fish, that will only feed him for a day. Rather teach the man how to fish, and then, he or she can, sort of figure it out for himself. Now, this actually violates that whole thing. It basically says, here is a wad of cash, take this and, survive for another day. And a lot of people question that this is very populist, and doesn't make sense. But, in the last 20 years, giving cash to the poor, whether with some conditions or completely unconstrained, has increasingly become a very popular choice, and especially in the developing countries, the poorer countries. Some books have been written about this issue, which try to evaluate why this is happening. And they sort of look at many economies in the developing world, such as Mexico, South Africa, Namibia, Brazil, and India. And they talked about why more and more politicians are sort of using this as a tool. For example, in India's case, NREGA was mentioned, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which basically in 2005, the government said that we'll provide uh, an opportunity for every family to get 100 days of labor and pay some basic minimum salary. Now, for not salary, some amount of daily wage for those 100 days. And that was at the heart of it, was this idea that, we'll give you some amount of money for the family to survive in the rural areas, because there was considered to be a massive rural distress. In many ways, similar story is playing out right now. There is obviously, in the urban India, there's higher in consumption levels, and rural India consumption levels are lower. So something similar is playing out even today. And the idea behind NREGA was to give a basic social safety net, some amount of income. And what researchers have found is that politicians across many of these developing countries found it to be a very reasonable idea to give a certain amount of money. And it goes back to the old dictum of not giving a man a fish and teaching him how to fish. Their idea is that, maybe a man is too feeble, too hungry to even learn how to fish. To give a more real world example, if you're saying that, if the government is saying that we are creating schools for your children, send your children to school. Maybe the family is too poor. Maybe the kid is helping the parents in the local enterprise, or their own enterprise, and they don't have the resources to let go of the kid, or maybe they are too poor to even send the kid to traverse that distance, or maybe buy shoes for the kid. So the idea behind such a policy solution was that give them some amount of income transfer, which just enables them to participate in many of the schemes that government is rolling out. So there is this last mile. They needed some kind of a help, the people, and by giving cash, you're just bridging that gap. So that's the basic idea, and it has actually been very successful, very popular, and very successful in many of the developing countries. And to be very fair, even the developed world actually uses direct income transfers, whether it is in the form of some kind of a child benefit or some kind of a housing benefit. So it's not totally unheard of in that sense of giving direct cash. Or we've seen this in the recent past also, where the government has, say in UK, given money or subsidized fuel consumption during winter months for a large population. So yeah, this actually made a lot of sense to a lot of politicians in the developing world. So one of the main, counter arguments to giving people cash is that a lot of people hold that this will make people lazy, the poor people lazy. They will not go out to work. They will be happy just taking this money, and they will not participate in the economy. And for an economy like India or most of the developing world, typical argument is that this raises the costs for any kind of productive enterprise, because if you're giving some money, the person needs a higher income to participate in the productive part of the economy. Now, there are two, three ways to look at this. One is that, it goes back to the question of why people are poor, or as poor as they are in developing countries, say even a country like India. Why are these people poor? Now, one argument could be they're poor because they're lazy, right? And the other argument could be they're poor because they are part of an unfair society, unfair economic system. If you believe that they're a lot of reason why people are so poor, so starkly poor, is because they cannot participate in the economy, that the economy sort of doesn't give them a chance, then you perhaps would feel um, you would perhaps approve of giving some money to the people. Whereas if you think that people are poor because they're lazy, then you are unlikely to actually feel incentivized to give money to the poor, because you'll say that uh, this will make them further lazy. So it really is a toss up. There are some surveys which showed that around 1995 and 2000, around that time, surveys showed that India was one of those economies which thought that people are poor because they are part of an unfair society. I mean, a majority number thought that way. There were a lot of people who also thought that they were poor because they were lazy and they didn't want to really make a difference in their life. But predominantly, most people thought it was an unfair economic system or society. So if you had that kind of a view, then it led to this kind of a policy change. Presumably, in the last decade or so, I think more and more people think that poverty is a marker that you're lazy or you're not willing to work hard, and perhaps that would show up in policy decisions. Um, but broadly, that was one counter to the thing. And the other thing was that this is wasteful expenditure for a government. Typically, developing economies have less money. Governments have less money. They are struggling with deficits. And a lot of people argue that why would you waste money just giving cash to the poor? It really is not productive. They don't do anything. But again, researchers have shown that that's not necessarily true. Actually, they have argued that if you give cash to the poorest in the economy, then those people spend that a lot. They have, because they need to consume a lot. They don't feel like saving, because the money basically goes into consumption, so it's spent. And it's not spent on things which are imported. It is spent on local businesses. So actually, when you give money to the poor, say in the village, then you actually lubricate the local economy. You give money which will then flow into different parts of the local economy. So it actually helps the local economy, and it actually helps the local producers, the artisans there, or any local enterprise. So on both counts, there have been counter arguments. Now, one interesting aspect of this is that a lot of people say that last time the Congress offered 72,000 rupees for the poor families. And BJP was only offering 6,000 for farmers. And yet Congress lost. So, even despite such a big gap between what they were offering, Congress lost. And why is that? Now, there are no clear answers. And typically, election results are not just hinged on one particular policy solution or promise. But, researchers have found that any such promise, any such policy initiative must have around five, hygiene factors. And that those factors are that such a promise should be fair, it should be assured, it should be practical. And what I mean by fair, assured, and practical is that the bureaucratic system, the banking system should be capable and there to actually deliver this thing. Then other two principles are that it should not be too meager an amount. And the last is that it should be popular. It should have the credibility in the eyes of the people. It should be a move that is politically acceptable. So, maybe in 2019, it was not considered to be politically acceptable to to, for a political party to give this money to the people, or that maybe Congress was not considered to be credible enough to deliver on that, and BJP was considered credible to deliver. So there could be various reasons why this may not have worked. But yeah, broadly, you need to have credibility. You need to have a certain amount of capacity to deliver that matters in any such promise.